Lee Van Cleef, born January 9, 1925 in Somerville, New Jersey, is one of the greatest icon of Western cinema, especially spaghetti Western films. Throughout his career spanning more than 5 decades, he captivated millions of audiences with his rugged, sharp looks and piercing eyes, making him the ideal choice for cold, calculating villains. Roll Angel Eyes ruthless but skilled in the 1966 classic The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly has etched his image into cinema history. However, behind the glamour of one of the genre's most beloved villains, Lee Van Cleef's life hides an internal conflict and one intense hatred that few people know about. This grudge is not directed against an imaginary enemy on screen, but against John Wayne, an illustrious symbol of the traditional American West. Van Cleef really hated Wayne more than anyone else. What made this rivalry so bitter, beyond the usual explanation of professional rivalry? Was he really just frustrated that John Wayne was too famous, holding him back in supporting roles? Or was there something deeper hidden in the glamorous but also dark life of a star, related to ideological and political pressure and the fight to regain true artistic value? Let's find out the exact truth about ideological crisis shaped Lee Van Cleef's worldview and legacy, peeling back layers of tragedy to better understand this brilliant yet angry artist. Lee Van Cleef, born Clarence Leroy Van Cleef Jr., was born on January 9, 1925, in Somerville, New Jersey, United States. He came from a family of Dutch descent. His father was a watchmaker, and his mother was a concert pianist. His father instilled in Van Cleef a strong sense of discipline and hard work, teaching him the value of precision and attention to detail. After graduating from Somerville High School, Van Cleef enlisted in the United States Navy in September 1942, serving in World War II. He was a radio operator and joined the fight. He served on a minesweeper. USS Incredible, do the missions on our man. The ship initially patrolled the Caribbean, then moved to the Mediterranean, participating in landings in southern France. His battlefield experience shaped much of his later roles, giving him a sharp look suited to tough, uncompromising characters. Upon his discharge in March 1946, he achieved the rank of Sonar Man First Class and was awarded numerous honors, including Bronze Star and Good Conduct Medal. After the war, Van Cleef studied engineering at the University of South Carolina. However, the acting world soon beckoned. He returned home, joined an amateur band, and landed his first role in a play. Our Town in Clinton, New Jersey. After another role in the play Heaven Can Wait, he was brought to New York by a talent scout and landed a role in the play Mr. Roberts. Turning point in film career until producer Stanley Kramer noticed him at a show. Mr. Roberts in Los Angeles, and invited him to participate in the film High Noon, 1952. Kramer wanted him to play Deputy Harvey Pell, but asked him to get a nose job. Van Cleef turned down the role and instead took the role of Jack Colby, a silent gunman with a menacing presence. Van Cleef's Hollywood career began inauspiciously, with small, uncredited roles, often as soldiers, cowboys, or supporting characters. His angular, sharp appearance led to his being cast in villainous roles, especially in westerns, where his appearance and demeanor seemed to project the image of a ruthless, hardened outlaw. Throughout the 1950s and early 1960s, he gradually built a reputation as a reliable supporting actor, appearing in popular Western television series such as The Lone Ranger, Tales of Wells Fargo, The Rifleman, and Gunsmoke. He also played supporting villains in major westerns such as The Tin Star and Gunfight at the OK Corral. In 1962, he played Reese, a villainous henchman of the main character in the film The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, starring John Wayne and James Stewart. However, despite his growing workload, Van Cleef's career stalled as he was restricted to one-dimensional villain roles. He struggled to break out of this mold. Personal challenges, including health problems following a car accident, further hindered him. The pinnacle of career until he caught the eye of director Sergio Leone. For a few dollars more, Leone chose Van Cleef, whose career was in decline, for the lead role. Colonel Douglas Mortimer, next to Clint Eastwood. This role marked a major change, transforming Van Cleef from a reliable supporting actor into a leading actor. Although the character still has anti-heroic qualities, Mortimer is a much more complex character than the nameless robbers he has played. This role has changed image. His work in Hollywood helped him achieve international fame. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966. Leone continued to cast Van Cleef as the main opposition, Angel Eyes, the bad. Van Cleef's performance carried a cold intensity. He added layers of complexity to the stereotypical villain archetype, deeply impressing audiences and critics alike. His distinctive look of sharp cheekbones, angular face, and eyes that seemed to pierce through his opponents made him a perfect fit for the villain role. Van Cleef brought prestige and complexity, certain for their villain roles, making these characters no longer simple antagonists. The success of the Dollars trilogy solidified Van Cleef's status. He continued to play leading, often central, even surprisingly heroic, roles in films such as The Big Gun Down, 1966, as lawyer-turned-hunter Jonathan Corbett, Death Rides a Horse, 1967, as Ryan, and Day of Anger, 1967, as Frank Talby. In these roles, he often portrayed veteran gunslingers whose experience and wisdom gave them a tragic dignity, even as they lived outside the law. In the 1970s and 1980s, Van Cleef's talents expanded beyond the Western genre. He appeared in a wider variety of roles, including action films and television. His distinctive voice and commanding demeanor were naturally suited to roles in films such as Escape from New York, 1981, where he played Commissioner Bob Houck, and The Octagon, 1980, co-starring with boxer Chuck Norris. This transition to action films helped him reach a new generation of fans. He also starred as martial arts expert John Peter McAllister in the television series The Master, 1984. Lee Van Cleef's personal life, though often overshadowed by his powerful on-screen roles, was full of drama and devotion to family. He was first married to Patsy Ruth Gooden, 1943, at a pivotal time in his life when he was balancing his emerging career and personal commitments. They had 3 children, David, Alan, and Deborah Van Cleef. Family life could be challenging due to Van Cleef's frequent absences due to his Hollywood work. The marriage dissolved in 1958 after 15 years, a difficult time when his career was also stalling. In 1960, Van Cleef married Joan Marjorie Drain. His relationship with Joan coincided with the period when his career began to flourish again after the car accident and when he was invited by Sergio Leone to act. For a Few Dollars More, 1965. Joan was there for him during this transition period, witnessing his rise to international fame. However, the pressures of this high-profile life were probably too much, and the couple divorced in 1974 after 14 years of marriage. Just 2 years later, in 1976, Van Cleef married Barbara Havalone. This third marriage seemed to bring Van Cleef stability after personal and professional turmoil. Barbara was by his side in his final years when his health began to decline due to heart problems and complications from previous injuries. She remained by his side until his death from a heart attack in 1989. One memorable detail in his personal life was the accident that left a lasting physical mark. He was lost the last joint of the middle finger of the right hand while building a toy house for her daughter Deborah. This incident demonstrated his dual nature, a strong, tough man on screen, but also a devoted father in his personal life. The loss of part of his finger did not hinder his acting career, but even contributed to strengthening his image. Tough guy, his tough man. Van Cleef demonstrated resilience and dedication for both his career and his role as a father, continuing to work in Hollywood despite his injury. However, along with his journey to overcome prejudice and regain fame, Lee Van Cleef always carries within him a persistent inner battle. A personal tragedy stemmed from a resentment of the old Hollywood system and the values it represented. Ironically, this hatred focused on one character, John Wayne. This feud has become part of Hollywood folklore. The relationship between Lee Van Cleef and John Wayne was tense and hostile, going beyond mere professional rivalry. To outsiders, it might seem puzzling that 2 iconic actors in the same genre would have such deep contempt for each other. Van Cleef, known for his fierce, villainous roles in spaghetti westerns, was no fan of the larger-than-life icon of the American Western, John Wayne, who was often cast as the noble, gritty hero. This mutual animosity lasted for years and affected their interactions in the film industry. Contrast in acting styles. A key factor in Van Cleef's hatred of Wayne was their contrasting acting styles. So, Van Cleefus, a method actor who immerses himself deeply in his roles. He is meticulous, often taking a gritty, quiet approach to portraying the morally complex characters for which he is renowned. John Wayne, on the other hand, was famous for playing the same archetypal character over and over again in a series of strong, quiet cowboy films that emphasized traditional values and displayed unwavering masculinity. For Van Cleef, this type of acting lacked of depth and sophistication. He viewed Wayne's reliance on personal image rather than flexibility as a sign of complacency and arrogance. In Van Cleef's eyes, Wayne represented aspects appearance Hollywood, taking advantage of larger-than-life images without putting in the necessary effort to expand their acting range. Political differences. Political differences only deepen the rift. Now, John Wayne was a prominent conservative, a strong supporter of right-wing policies, and a defender of American nationalism. He was an outspoken supporter of the Vietnam War and played a leading role in promoting traditional American values. Lee Van Cleef, more private about political views but inclined toward more progressive ideals, embraced the counterculture movement that criticized American imperialism and traditional values. Van Cleef argues that Wayne's political ostentation was disgusting and saw Wayne's staunch support for militarism and conservatism as symbolic of a narrow-minded worldview. To Van Cleef, Wayne's public image seemed to be an extension of his on-screen roles as the uncompromising, self-righteous cowboy, unable to see the complexities of the world outside his own belief system. The political and professional opposition is only superficial. Underlying cause. What led to Van Cleef's bitterness was the huge difference in how they approached fame and ran their Hollywood careers. John Wayne achieved superstardom early and maintained A-list status throughout his career. He was beloved by audiences and considered an American hero, which gave him a level of influence and control over his projects that few actors had. Van Cleef, on the other hand, had a tumultuous journey. In his early years, he was often relegated to supporting roles, overshadowed by leading men like Wayne. It wasn't until his success with spaghetti westerns, thanks to Sergio Leone, that Van Cleef received the recognition he deserved as a leading man. Even after his rise to fame, Van Cleef's fame paled in comparison to Wayne's. Van Cleef wrathed with the way Hollywood, dominated by stars like Wayne, had framed him for too long. He felt that actors like Wayne had exclusive spotlight, leaving others with little chance to break through. This is the origin of deep bitterness for Wayne. Beyond the professional frustrations, there were more personal grievances stemming from off-camera interactions. Van Cleef, who was more introverted and reserved, despised the type of aggressive and domineering Wayne, who is said to throw his weight in the industry. Even when they interact, the tension is evident. Wayne is said to have despised talent. Van Cleef's critics viewed him as a supporting actor who was good at playing villains, but lacked the charisma or star quality to be a leading man. This attitude further angered Van Cleef, who felt that Wayne's success was a product of luck and timing, not raw talent. The professional rivalry between the two was exacerbated by the fact that both were vying for dominance in the Western genre. Wayne represented old Hollywood style. Van Cleef represents spaghetti westerns. Van Cleef believed that his Western style better reflected the complexities of the real world, while Wayne's films maintained the outdated ideal on American exceptionalism and border justice. This ideological clash only added to Van Cleef's contempt for Wayne, as he felt Wayne's portrayal of the Western hero was too simplistic, failing to acknowledge the moral gray areas that existed in the actual history of the American West. He spent much of his professional life fighting an industry dominated by an ideology he hated. John Wayne represented everything Van Cleef despised, a man who became the face of a version of clean of American history and a Hollywood system that often ignores more complex, nuanced performances. For Van Cleef, working in an industry dominated by figures like Wayne was a regular reminder about the struggles he faced in his own career, and this bitterness haunted him for the rest of his life. The real nature of this confrontation is one fundamental conflict of values and ideologies. Lee Van Cleef's inner crisis lay not in his death, of a heart attack in 1989, but in his continuing resentment of the shallowness and lack of depth he saw at the pinnacle of traditional Hollywood. His hatred of Wayne was the personalization of his lifelong struggle to prove that complex acting and multidimensional characters were more valuable than stereotypical heroic figures. The tragedy of Van Cleef, relegated to supporting roles, was the driving force behind his great legacy. Despite enduring health problems since the 1970s and even having a pacemaker implanted in the 1980s, he continued to work. This resilience is reflected in his career. It was this frustration with traditional Hollywood that drove Van Cleef to Sergio Leone in the spaghetti western genre, where he was not only recognized but also allowed to explore characters with depth and moral ambiguity. It was here that he could realize his view of the complexity of the Western world, in stark contrast to Wayne's old-fashioned ideals. The greatest thing in Tragedy Van Cleef's point was that he used his own professional and political indignation to convey majesty and vulnerability into his villainous roles. He helped redefining the role of the villain in Westerns, turning a character that could have been one-dimensional into an unforgettable one. Lee Van Cleef died on December 16, 1989, at the age of 64, of a heart attack at his home in Oxnard, California. Throat cancer was listed as the secondary cause of death. His death marked the end of an era in Western cinema, as he was one of the last great icons of the genre. His legacy lives on through his massive body of work. His performances in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and For a Few Dollars More, remains the benchmark of great Westerns. Audiences still remember his characters as some of the most compelling ever to appear on the silver screen. In 1983, he received the award, Golden Boot Award, for his contributions to the Western film and television genre. Van Cleef's images have served as visual inspiration for many famous fictional characters, demonstrating his timeless influence. Van Cleef is a testament to the power of reinvention, dedication, and the ability to create characters that resonate with audiences long after the film has ended. Despite being held back by the old Hollywood system and hating its representative, John Wayne, it was his style of opposition and critical thinking that helped him create a distinct legacy. His burial at Forest Lawn Memorial Park Cemetery, Hollywood Hills, California, bears the inscription, Best of the Bad, a fitting tribute to his remarkable villain performances. His ongoing feud with Wayne has become part of Hollywood folklore. Lee Van Cleef's life and career is the story of an artist who was prejudiced, but in the end reshaped an entire genre of cinema. His inner tragedy, his deep hatred for the simplistic values and monopoly of fame that John Wayne represented, did not weaken him, but became a silent inspiration for him to overcome the stereotype and bring moral complexity essential for the silver screen. He proved that a villain character with his own emotional depth and ideology could have a greater impact than any stereotypical hero. Lee Van Cleef was not only the bad on screen, but also an underground critic who created a distinct style in opposition to what he saw as the arrogance and complacency of traditional Hollywood. What questions does the hidden truth about this fierce political and professional confrontation, which has become part of the artistic heritage, pose to us? In your opinion, is Lee Van Cleef's transformation of personal anger and ideological conflict into groundbreaking and complex performances his ultimate victory over the old Hollywood system, or is it simply a confirmation of the invisible burden artists carry when they fight for authenticity in an industry that favors superficiality?